anxiety, loneliness, and depression as a result of this coronavirus pandemic taking place across the country. How do we deal with that, including social distancing? Well, joining us right now is mental health therapist Suzette Clark. Suzette, glad to have you on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
This is a huge, just dramatic shift for a whole bunch of people. There are people, of course, who are used to going to work, going to school. Now, all of a sudden, they're at home. Now they are around their spouses, their partners, 24 hours a day, their children. I saw a video the other day where Sherry Shepherd was just in tears having to deal with the fact that she got to deal with her son every single day for the next 2 months. I mean, this thing, and so a lot of people really don't understand that, look, you're used to only being around, frankly, friends or loved ones a few hours. Now all of a sudden it's constant.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so what we're facing now is something that was so sudden that it completely changed our
I'm having some issues.
Our lives.
There we
so
go.
We naturally and
all right, so here's the deal. I'm having some issues with your Skype.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm having some issues with your Skype. So guys, let's do this here. Let's drop the Skype. Let's just bring her up on want and then we'll just go with audio so we can at least hear her and not have it break up. So let me know when we have it there. Okay? So I want to do that. So let me know when we have her straight there. When it comes to that, I want to go to Reese and Greg in short term. Reese, again, for a lot of people, I mean, this is a dramatic shift, and they're seeing a whole lot of their loved ones more than they ever thought they ever would.
Yeah, I mean, it's an adjustment. You have some people that are stuck together, and then you have other people who are very isolated. I don't know, maybe I sound a little optimistic here, but my social life has been pretty robust recently with all of the virtual happy hours that I've been doing with my friends. You have the concerts that these artists have been putting on. You have the live DJ sets from DJ D Nice and Kick Free and Plus Up and all these great people. So, I mean, there are ways. It's obviously I'm not, touching on the seriousness of the mental health part that your guest was going to talk about, but I still think that there are ways that we can still stay connected with our social media, and that's how I'm coping with it. My husband and I are together. I work upstairs during the day. He works downstairs, so we still get some of our me time. But I think there are a lot of ways that you can kind of keep yourself occupied even while staying at home and saving lives.
Greg?
No, I agree. I mean, I think about the most vulnerable people in our society. Those who don't have a place to sleep tonight, who are already always on that margin. What are they going through? The elders and the folks who are isolated maybe by themselves. And you talked about Mark Lamont Hill, our dear brother's father, who was in this facility and they won't even let anybody see him he let his son see him, obviously for health reasons. Just read something from one of our colleagues who teaches in high school, Nubia Garima Rogers, who directs the Carter G. Woodson Black Studies Academy over at Dunbar High School here in D.C. And she said in her online interaction with her students, she and her teachers are fielding mental health issues and challenges around this isolation from teenagers. And certainly I heard a lot of that dealing with my college students as well. Not that they're having mental health challenges in the bad sense, but this isolation is a new thing, as is this being in proximity. The only other thing I would say is this. All the administrators out there and all the folks who think that perhaps it's good to fill up the schedule now with virtual meetings and Zoom meetings and conference calls, let's slow our roll. Because one of the things that isolation does, for those of us who are safe, who are fed, who are healthy, for those of us who are in spaces where we don't have to worry about that, it gives us an opportunity for reflection. For those of you who are into it, prayer. For those of you who are into it, meditation. For me, y'all know what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be reading till my eyeballs foul out. And I know my brother, Roland Martin, who has been tweeting about this the whole time, don't know what to do because he's on the road all the damn time. Roland, tell them, brother, what's the value of you being able to sit at home for
Well, that is the case. And some people got a little attitude when I posted that on my Instagram page. Suzette Clark is back with us. And Suzette, again, you heard what Reese and Greg said there, how different people at different stages in their lives and, frankly, in their mental state are coping with this coronavirus pandemic.
That's right. It can be very difficult because everyone had a daily routine prior to 2 weeks ago. And all of a sudden, the routine was halted. And so we have now, if you were working, if you were an adult with children who are school age, they're all home, you're home. And what if they have a spouse or a significant other who goes to work? You're worried about that person being out and possibly contracting the virus. So we have so many natural reactions of fear and anxiety. Uncertainty is what we're afraid of. Afraid of the future. What will happen to my family? What will happen to me? We have a fear of mortality. Is this going to take someone out in my family? Will it be me? And our physical health. So all justifiable, natural responses to this situation, but we have to find a way to combat the thoughts that may turn into more of a ruminating thought where it's persistent. It's daily thinking, what's going to happen? What do I need? What do I not have? What will I not receive again? So we have to kind of manage those thoughts. So I would say starting off, plan your day. That's the most important thing, especially with the children. Roland, I don't know if you see all of the memes with the parents standing over the kids with the belts and everything.
Right.
It's hilarious. Yes, it is. I had those parents. My parents have been on to daycare most of my childhood. But, yeah, I had those parents. But I also saw an article about maybe last week that the cases of child abuse, the reported cases now from the hospital and from the mental health professionals, had almost doubled just in a week. So we can't take the frustration and anger out on our children. You know, I know my nieces and nephews came home with tons of work. It's okay. Do what you can do. Plan your day. Take advantage as the adults. Take advantage of this time. Take advantage of it. Maybe hone into some things that you like and love and have wanted to do for some time, but you could not because you were working. So now's the time. Find a way to combat the negative thoughts and try to replace them with positive behaviors and thoughts.
Obviously, again, people are at different points. Those people who are economically are not as bad as other folks. I mean, look, that's a whole different deal. Totally understand that. But I think also people need to understand that we're all not the same. That we all have different stations in life. The other day I was on last night I was on Instagram Live, and Aisha Curry went live because Stephen Curry, her husband, was setting up a drum set, and he always would learn how to play drums. So it's kind of like, well, I can use the opportunity to play drums. Greg was talking about someone like me who's an avid reader, and I think a lot of people also don't understand that. Like, what's your life is your life. You know, Suzette, I posted something on my Instagram page and Facebook and Twitter page, and a whole bunch of people got upset. And I'm gonna read that. Here we go to my iPad. This is what I posted. I really don't get why folks are tripping about having to stay at home. Since I travel so much, it's great to be home for a full week, have unpacked suitcases and not planning multiple trips every month. I've never slept this much. This is not bothering me one bit. Trust me, I know this has been mighty disruptive to a lot of folks. And yes, I still drive in to do Roland Martin Unfiltered, but I think we often get so busy with our lives that we don't get to just slow it all down, think, relax, read, spend QT with family, use this time wisely. Then I had all these people losing a damn mind on my page. You don't know what people are going through. This is insensitive. This is arrogant. You're showing you're an elitist and you're privileged. And I said, I'm sorry. My perspective is my damn perspective. Everybody, and I said, I don't have to take into account the entire world situation. I'm simply sharing this moment and how I'm dealing with this here. Just like I'm not going to tell somebody else, well, you shouldn't share what you're doing or how you experience it. And this to me is the silliness that I think some people have when people can't step back and say, wait a minute, that's your experience. But here's mine, and here's somebody else's.
Right, and I think it can also be attributed to, again, the fears. Because to see someone post that everything is together, happy, and I'm in a world where I'm not happy, my house is a mess, the children are on my nerve, what do I do? You know, then I will lash out. But again, it goes back to taking advantage of this time personally. make a do some personal reflection, make the most of it, because it's a situation that we have lost control of. We were thrown into it. So what do humans do? We adapt. We have to adjust and, still comfort our loved ones, still check on our parents, all of the elder people in our family, make the most. They're going to be there either way. They're going to be there. So, again, do self-reflection, hone into some of the things that you have.
Looks like we're losing.
If you wanted to walk daily, that's the time to do it.
All right, Suzette Clark, we surely appreciate it. Thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
All right then, folks. And so again, look, the reality is this here. People are going through different things and different experiences when it comes to this. The reality is it's happening. It's impacting everybody. And we have to understand that. Folks, also, don't forget, this also is an election year. And now all of a sudden, you've got candidates, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, trying to figure out, do they still participate in debates? Do they participate in dealing with campaigning? You got states deciding whether or not they're going to be holding primaries. All these different things that have been going on, and you still have the election in November. We have no idea if we're going to have mail-in by ballot and what's going on in that stimulus bill. That was some money with the states to help them when it comes to elections. So how do we deal with that? What do we do? Do we even care? Joining us is Gilda Daniels. She's associate professor at the Baltimore School of Law. We're going to have her on just in a second. Let me know when she's on, folks. She's also the author of The Crisis of Voter Suppression in America. What's interesting, Greg, is I blasted this conservative this morning who was whining. Mark Davis, he's a radio talk show host out of Texas, and he was whining about mail-in balloting. And Kristen Clark, the Laws Committee for Civil Rights under law, she's talked before about mail-in ballot, how it's not necessarily the one thing that black folks do. We like going to the polls. But what was quite interesting when he started complaining about this whole deal by saying that this is just simply going to be, let me find the tweet here, how it's going to be encouraging massive voter fraud when you have states like Oregon and Washington State that are completely mail-in balloting, and they have some of the highest voting numbers every single election, Greg.
Yeah, in fact, I think it was the governor in Washington said that's what saved it with the impending coronavirus. There was $400 million in this bill, but according to the New York Times, they just did an article on this. That's about 20% of the $2 billion that voting experts would say was needed to do mail-in. Could this country vote completely by mail-in? Absolutely, they could. If you go back to the 1918 epidemic, you find that the voting tanked. It went under 40%. In national election that came up. If you look at the years before that, it was up over 50%. But I guarantee you this, if this country went to mail-in voting, in some states, it isn't even an option to come in. You have to mail, as you said. You would see a rise in voter participation, and that's what the GOP does not want to happen. The other thing I say, when you get your guest on, this is one of the challenges of not being here. If she was in the studio, I would pull her copy, my copy of her book that just came out one of these stacks and get her to sign it. So I can't wait to hear what she has to say on this subject.
And joining us right now is Gilda Daniels, again, author of the book, The Crisis of Voter Suppression in America. Gilda, Mark Davis, I was just saying Mark Davis, a radio talk show host in Texas. He tweeted this: I would far rather postpone primaries than invite the monstrous fraud of hashtag voting by mail. Notice which side is all in for this disaster. You'll know all you need to know. Really? I mean, obviously he's a conservative talk show host, big time Trump supporter, and the monstrous fraud, no evidence, no nothing, just whining about voting by mail. Which, what else are you going to do if you still have coronavirus impacting the nation?
Right. And this just highlights the crisis that we certainly have in our country and how we undervalue the voting process and the democratic process. And what we need to know is that we have entire states that only use voting by mail. the only way people vote is to actually mail in their ballots. So there's certainly some advantages to it, and we certainly need to prepare now to ensure that we're ready for November should we have this similar crisis or pandemic in the future.
In your book, you talk about, again, this crisis. And look, this thing was exacerbated by Shelby v. Holder. Republicans went crazy with it because, let's just cut to the chase, they freaked the hell out when they saw a black turnout for Obama in 2008 and then 2012.
Yes. And so Shelby County v. Holder certainly has made it more difficult to cast ballots. We've certainly seen since in 2013 when the Shelby County versus Holder decision came out, that states have actually been doing more in regards to voter suppression. Prior to Shelby, certain states would have had to go on through the federal government and get approval before they could implement changes like polling place closures or changing poll hours or eliminating or shortening the early voting period. But now, since they don't have to get that approval from the federal government, they are doing it without having any vetting whatsoever of whether or not these changes are impacting voters of color. And they are. We've certainly seen since Shelby that we've had massive voter polling place closures, also voter purges. I think you probably saw in the span of a week in January, Wisconsin and Georgia purged about 300,000 voters. And without Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, and certainly since Shelby County versus Holder, we don't have the ability to know when those changes are going to happen before they happen, because before Shelby, we would know before they were going to happen and be able to stop them and to review them and to determine that they would impact voters of color. So certainly when I was at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division as a deputy chief, those were the kinds of things that we would review so that we could certainly provide assurances to communities of color that the election laws that were being implemented would not put them in a worse position than what they currently were.
All right, Greg, you got a question?
Prof, I really think as you're analyzing the bill, and first of all, thank you for your work. It's very important.
Thank you.
Y'all got some real serious folks up there at UB. We'll talk about that another time. But right. What do you think it would take to jailbreak this House and this Senate to push them to expand the amount of dollars? Because we know this is just the first of many bills. We got $400 million this time. How could you? What is your recommendation for us? What can we do to push them to maybe even expand that number in the next round of intervention funding?
Well, we said we have to keep pushing. We have to certainly keep pushing in regards to the House and the Senate. We have a number of organizations. I'm also the litigation director for Advancement Project National Office, and we certainly joined with other organizations in arguing that we needed the money in this COVID-19 bill to certainly get states up and ready, to begin the process to update their machinery, as well as having to print these vote by mail ballots, because they're very important, and we need all the states at least to have that as an option and to loosen the requirements for absentee balloting. And we need a whole lot of money for public education because although people can have access to the ballots, it's different from every state what is needed in order to actually obtain the ballot and then to return the ballot. So we need money for public education. And we need money for the machines. They're going to need an increased number of personnel who are actually going to review the ballots as well.
Reese, you got a question?
Yeah. So with absentee ballot, I think that's one way that sometimes it seems like Republicans have manipulated the vote, at least by the way I perceive it, because in a lot of times Black communities, there's a higher rejection rate of vote by mail. What can be done to ensure that if we do move to an entirely vote by mail system or a much more robust vote by mail system, that we don't see that, Black voters who would typically just go to the ballot and cast a regular ballot aren't experiencing higher levels of voter suppression through these rejected absentee ballots?
Right. That is a very real problem. We certainly saw in Georgia during the 2018 election. Uh, Candidate Stacey Abrams was actually encouraging people to use absentee ballots and to vote by mail. But we saw a very high rejection rate for voters of color. We saw in counties throughout the state of Georgia that people were being rejected on their exact match law, that if there was a hyphen missing or a period after Mrs. or something of that sort, something very minor, they're saying that their signature didn't match, those kinds of things were used as a basis to reject ballots. And you saw them rejecting about 50,000 ballots. And it's interesting to note that the Republican candidate only won by about 50,000 ballots. Right. So how voting by mail has a higher rejection percentage than voting in person, and for particularly for communities of color, voting by mail, we actually have to have a culture shift, because we don't do absentee balloting in large numbers. Referring to my book, I use my grandmother as a timeline, and as I lovingly called her, Madia for Mother Dear. So Madia would not be somebody who would actually vote by mail, because it was voting. This was an act of dignity, certainly for older African Americans, right? It is an act of dignity. That's why you see them in white collared shirts and ties, and you see the black women with their hats and pocketbooks, right? She would still go vote with her pocketbook and her hair pressed. And so to say that she could not have that opportunity, that she would only be allowed to vote by mail, would certainly cause a complete culture shift in the Black community, particularly for older African Americans. So I think voting by mail can be one of several options, but we certainly have to have that as the primary option, should we have a similar situation as we do now for the primaries.
Right, and the bottom line is, look, with the primary situation, this may be your only way of getting it done, because you want to keep people safe. Because, look, you don't want these older voters going to the polls in crowds and then all of a sudden contracting coronavirus.
And can I tell you, Roland, that in Florida, I told you I'm the litigation director for Advancement Project. We filed a lawsuit in Florida to get them to expand voting opportunities for the March 17th primary. They did not. And one thing that came out today in the news was that there were poll workers who have now tested positive for the coronavirus. So people who went to those polls, right, were now certainly could have contracted as well. So there are a number of things that the CDC says that we need to do in polling places if we're going to have in-person voting. The CDC has actually told polling places what they need to do. But this just demonstrates how we don't pay enough attention, and certainly don't pay enough money to ensure that our election system can withstand these kinds of challenges.
Folks, the book is called The Crisis of Voter Suppression in America. The author is Gilda Daniels, Associate Professor at the Baltimore School of Law. Gilda, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir.
All right, then. So it is, great. These are the things. This is what I keep saying to people. What we are so used to doing is going to change. You look at what's happening right now, whether or not things open up. The NFL just announced they're going to go forward with the NFL draft April 23rd through 25th. Look, we don't know if the virus is still going to be, if we're going to be on that downward slope. We don't. Where's testing? Are we going to actually see mass testing? Are we still going to see cases? And so, bottom line is, these things are going to happen. And so, there are things that we are used to doing that are likely going to have to change. And look, we should just be getting our folks prepared that, all right, double check those addresses. Make sure that it's drive or lane or not, it's NW, not NE. All of those different things that are critically important, because we want to make sure our votes are counted.
Absolutely, brother. And let's start with you. Those of you watching this, understand that Roland, and not just Roland, but the crew broadcasting Roland Martin Unfiltered, is in the building. Understand that makes them essential personnel. Understand what that means in terms of sacrifice. So as we think about those who are providing information for us, please keep them in mind and in prayer, and keep them lifted up. That's number one. Everything has to change. Everything is going to change. What are we finding out? Of course the NFL is saying that. Why? because baseball is gone. The NBA is gone. March Madness is gone. And people have turned away from watching ESPN and all these things because guess what they're finding out? If it ain't live sports, I'm not watching reruns. So they are terrified. This is a billions of dollar industry. People are now turning off reality shows. People are now saying, I'm saturated binge watching stuff like Netflix. Maybe it'll drive them back to doing some absolute study. But the point is that everything is about to change. As I said, Dr. Frederick was being gentle with it, but he still made the point, we're not even near the peak. These hospitals are getting ready to get overrun. Now, does that mean to panic? No, but what it does mean is that we now have to prepare for the world past the world we used to live in. And that means that as these institutions reform, whether it be a black church that can't get online, that's now going to have to look to something else, whether it's going to be an educator like me and all my colleagues at black schools who can now think about jailbreaking their classes and going into the cyber universe. And now when you say Harvard, what does that mean? I Googled and I saw somebody from Claflin College who knows more about it than anybody on the Harvard faculty. We now have to realize as black people finally that this is not even close to the greatest challenge we ever faced. Remember, we were brought here naked and in chains, taken from our homes. So when we take a different kind of attitude, I was on a call Sunday with Paul Coates and Keturah Hudson and a bunch of the black booksellers in this country. Sankofa Books here in the city with Holly and Shriek Garima. They are now saying, you know what? Don't look at this as something that's going to put us out of business. Let's go online and make all these black books available to the world. If we look at it differently, realizing we're not going back to that world we were in, we might mess around and get free, brother.
Reese?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that we're all going to have to adapt. I think that we have to start preparing now. If you look at what First Lady Michelle Obama did, partnering with D. Nice, who had his club quarantine, which has gone viral and it's been a huge thing. And she said, look, let's partner up. Let's do when we all vote and let's register voters. We have to, like you said,
300,000 signed up.
Yes, and this is in March. And so some people might feel like, well, that's too early. We have to get registered. We have to stay registered. We have so much education we're going to have to do in terms of understanding how we're going to do this new vote by mail thing. So there is a new landscape that we have to understand in terms of our civic participation, where people thought it was too much work to show up to the polls. Well, now you're going to have to learn how to absentee vote potentially. And so, yeah, and I also agree with Dr. Carr that this does present entrepreneurial opportunities. I mean, I heard some people, for instance, complain about Erykah Badu and the fact that she charged $1 for her concert. Well, I think people are going to, be thankful that Erykah Badu is one of the few people that said, no, I'm not going to give you something for free. I'm going to charge you $1 and set up that business model for other artists who aren't going to be able to tour for months on end. And so I think we are entering a new landscape. I think Black people are naturally entrepreneurial. Black people are adapt to the situation, and businesses are forced to adapt. There's so much adapting that we're going to have to do,
right?
Because we don't know how long this is going to last. So we have to hunker down, but we have to figure out new ways for some people to have revenue streams to maintain their livelihood. And I think it's going to, birth a lot of innovation for all of the heartache and all of the trials and tribulations it's going to cause. We are going to come out with a lot more new ways of doing business and living in our society.